morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Global Atheist News Roundup, dateline the 15th of February 2025. Here are this week's headlines. Donald Trump signed executive orders to push school vouchers, censor classrooms and threaten federal funding for schools that refuse to conform to his conservative religious agenda. J.D. Vance says foreign aid is spreading atheism, and he defends cuts at the Religious Freedom Summit. Pope Francis takes aim at Vance's definition of ordo amoris in a letter to US bishops. There is a flashback to a Palestinian Muslim cleric raging against girls over the age of 10 still being virgins. Ghanaians are fighting in insurgency-hit Burkina Faso. Members of the General Synod try to stop the opening speech by the Archbishop of York. The Church of England rejects fully independent safeguarding. Catholics argue that university anti-union efforts go against religious teachings. No more prayers in Parliament, MPs say. And success. The plan to scrap the cap on faith school selection is halted. And now for the news in detail. Trump's order directs federal agencies to divert funding from public schools to private and religious institutions. Vouchers funnel tax dollars into schools that discriminate against LGBTQ+ students, non-religious students, and students with disabilities. Trump is preparing an executive order to shrink or eliminate the Department of Education. His hand-picked education secretary, Linda McMahon, is a billionaire Christian nationalist whose allies openly call for replacing public education with religious indoctrination. Kevin Bolling, executive director of the Secular Student Alliance, put it bluntly, "This is not just about education. This is about who controls the future. Whether our students have access to facts, critical thinking, and academic freedom, or whether they are forced into a system that prioritizes religious dogma over education." The Secular Student Alliance is working with students across the country to push back. Vice President J.D. Vance defended cuts to US foreign aid in his remarks to the International Religious Freedom Summit on February the 5th, arguing that the funds were spreading atheism abroad. Vance's comments came as the Trump administration moved to shutter the US Agency for International Development, the government's humanitarian aid agency. Elon Musk, tech billionaire and ally of President Donald Trump, targeted it for closure as part of the efforts of his Department of Government Efficiency, an unofficial task force with the stated intent of curbing federal spending. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested some of its functions would be rolled into the State Department. Now our administration believes we must stand for religious freedom not just as a legal principle, important as that is, but as a lived reality, both within our borders and especially outside our borders, Vance said. He argued, "Think about it. How did America get to the point where we're sending hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars abroad to NGOs that are dedicated to spreading atheism all over the globe? That is not what leadership on protecting the rights of the faithful looks like, and it ends with this administration," Vance said. He didn't specify which NGOs he was making the claim about. But according to a review by Forbes, USAID's top NGO recipient for fiscal years 2013 to 2022 was Catholic Relief Services at $4.6 billion. The non-profit, which is the US Catholic Church's Overseas Relief and Development Agency, is dedicated to assisting people who are poor and vulnerable overseas, reducing social and economic pressures that push people to leave their homes and migrate, in accordance with Catholic teaching. In a letter to US bishops published on Tuesday, February the 11th, Pope Francis seemed to criticize recent comments by US Vice President J.D. Vance, a Catholic himself, who accused Democrats of prioritizing the needs of migrants over those of US citizens, citing the Catholic concept of ordo amoris, order of love. The true ordo amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, that is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception, Pope Francis wrote in the letter. The Pope explained that Catholic charity isn't just a series of concentric circles extending from the individual to family, friends, and fellow citizens, and ultimately the world, but it is centered on human dignity with a special concern for the poorest. Francis condemned ideologies that are first concerned with personal, community, and national identity. In a flashback, a Palestinian Muslim cleric was shown raging against girls over the age of 10 still being virgins and wasting the eggs that Allah put inside them for Muslim men to use. He insists this is what Allah wants. See this video.
Allah أذن لمحمد أن يتزوج أمنا عائشة وهي ابنة 9 تزوجها وهي ابنة 9 سنوات. هذا رسول الله، هذا الرسول لا نرضى عمله، لقد عمل عملا ينافي المعايير الدولية، يغضب الأمم المتحدة. الزواج الذي رضيه الله عليه علامات في أجساد النساء والرجال، فإذا ما حاضت المرأة يخلق الله فيها كل شهر بويضة، هذه البويضة تنتظر حملا، فإذا لم يحدث الحمل حاضت، لأن الحمل قد فشل. يعني ربنا يقول هذه امرأة جاهزة للزواج فزوجوها.
3 Ghanaians have told the BBC of their involvement in the fighting between Islamist insurgents and the military in neighbouring Burkina Faso, describing scenes of sometimes indiscriminate violence and bloody battles. We are always with the dead. In some battles I've seen 40, 50 or 100 dead people, one of the men told the BBC. They denied being primarily motivated by religion or being trained by the jihadists, saying that they went to defend civilian communities with whom they had strong family and ethnic ties. My older brother, his wife and children were all killed by the Burkinabe army. It pains me a lot. The military came to their community in the forest. They killed all of them, a whole household, including 29 people, one of the men said. But another of the men did articulate religious zeal, saying, "If you die while fighting with the jihadists, then you are driving to Jannah, paradise, on the path of the righteous." The Archbishop of York has been the subject of a revolt by a significant minority of members at the Church of England's ruling body after an attempt was made to block his opening address. A third of the members of the General Synod declined to give Stephen Cottrell their backing by either voting in favour of the move to prevent his speech or abstaining. The action was intended to send a message to the nation that his position was no longer tenable, said Sam Margrave, who moved the motion. It came after a senior bishop again called for Cottrell to quit, saying it was inappropriate for him to be leading change that the church needs at this time. Helen Ann Hartley, the Bishop of Newcastle, told BBC Radio 4's Today programme, "I think he's the wrong person. I think to be in that position of leadership, you have to talk the talk and walk the walk, and you can't have one without the other. And I think for him to have allowed a priest accused of abuse to remain in post was abhorrent." The Church of England's governing body, the Synod, has rejected a fully independent safeguarding model to deal with abuse cases. General Synod members instead adopted an alternative proposal described as a way forward in the short term, ahead of a move to full independence in the future. But child safety expert Professor Alexis J., who had called for a fully independent model, described the decision as deeply disappointing and devastating for victims and survivors. The vote comes after a turbulent period for the Church, which has seen the resignation of former Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby over his handling of an abuse case and criticism of Archbishop of York Stephen Cottrell's links to another. Mr. Cottrell, who has stepped in as temporary head of the Church, said he supported independence in safeguarding and was disappointed that it would now happen in 2 stages. He added that he would fully commit himself to implementing Synod's decision and making it happen. The Church has been accused of failings over the way it dealt with cases of sexual and physical child abuse spanning decades, and it launched a review of its safeguarding procedures. The Synod had been expected to vote on a model backed by Professor Alexis J., who previously chaired the National Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, and another model. However, following an amendment, the Professor J-backed model, which proposed that all safeguarding staff would be entirely independent of the Church, wasn't voted on at all, and a less ambitious proposal was adopted. Non-tenure-track faculty at Marquette University, a Jesuit school in Milwaukee, had been working for months to unionize and were preparing for a National Labor Relations Board-sanctioned election to join the United Campus Workers of Wisconsin when, in October, their employer invoked a religious exemption to quash their efforts. Giordana Poglio-Kaftan, a non-tenured faculty member who directs the Italian program, and a Catholic, was bewildered. "I don't understand how that is possible," she told a religious news service. Not only had other Catholic institutions already unionized, but papal teachings stretching over a century promote unions. In the last 15 years, at least 8 Catholic universities have invoked religious exemptions to avoid recognizing unions that include faculty or graduate students. MPs have called for an end to prayers as part of the official business of Parliament in a motion backed by the National Secular Society. The Early Day motion, tabled by Labour MP Neil Duncan Jordan this week, says religious worship should not play any part in the formal business of the House of Commons. It adds that parliamentary prayers are not compatible with a society which respects the principle of freedom of and from religion, and calls on the Modernisation Committee to consider alternative arrangements. 7 other MPs, including those from the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party and the Scottish National Party, have also signed the EDM. Sittings in both the House of Commons and the Lords begin with Anglican prayers, Obtaining a prayer card and attending prayers is in practice the only way to reserve seats in the chamber, meaning MPs who wish to attend or speak in busy sessions may have to attend the prayers. Green MP Ellie Chowns, who signed the early day motion last year, called the prayer card system for reserving seats, frankly, rather ridiculous. Analysis by Pew Research Centre last year revealed less than 10% of people in the UK pray every day, the lowest percentage out of 102 countries. The National Secular Society has welcomed the government's announcement that it has abandoned plans to scrap the 50% cap on faith-based admissions at free schools after the plans faced heavy opposition. The proposals were introduced by the previous government last year following intensive lobbying from religious groups. The National Secular Society strongly opposed the plans and urged then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to retain the cap. Under the 50% cap, new academies and free schools with a religious character in England may only select up to 50% of pupils based on their religion when they are oversubscribed. Removing the cap would have enabled these schools to select 100% of children based on their parents' religion if they were oversubscribed. This has been Global Atheist News. Please like, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching.